So now we're going to create a way to retrieve our users from our API. And just like we did for our auth, we created a service to query our database. We're going to do the same for our users. So I'm going to create a new service inside here. I'm just going to right click and generate service. And I'm just going to call this user. And this will make it user.service.ts. And let's open up our service file. And we're going to be querying our API from this file. So I'm going to add a property for the base URL. And we could add this as a string inside here, just as we did in our auth service. But let's take the opportunity to look at a slightly different approach while we're here. In our Solution Explorer, our Angular CLI, when we generated our project, gave us an environments folder. And two different environments, environment.ts and environment.prod.ts. So we'll use this one to specify our base URL. So I'll add a comma after where it says production is false, and I'll say API URL, and I'll set this to HTTP localhost 5000/API, and I'll also add the / after this as well. And then I'll go back to the user service and I'll set the base URL and I'll say environment, and I'll bring in environment from environments.environment, and I'll set this to the API URL. The advantage of doing it this way is that eventually, and we're some way off this yet, but eventually we're going to want to publish our application and it's going to run in production mode. And in production mode, we'll be using a different URL to contact our API than we're using in development. So this is quite a handy little shortcut. It means that we don't need to change our API URL inside our services themselves. We can just come into our environment.ts and update it in there. Or in our case, we will just need to add one for our production one. So let's also update it in the auth service as well. And instead of saying base URL is this, we'll still need to add the auth part onto this afterwards. But we'll say environment dot API URL, and then I'll say plus, and we'll just add in the auth and the /. So now we have that. Back to our user service. Now in our constructor, we're going to want to make use of the HttpClient service. So we'll say private HTTP and HttpClient. Once again, be careful about which one we import. We want the one from Angular Common HTTP. And in here, we're going to add a couple of methods. We're going to add a method to get the users. And this is going to return an observable. And notice the import here from RxJS that happened automatically. So do ensure you have that in. And this is going to return an observable of type user. And again, I'll just grab the auto import from our models/user file. And what we want to do here, we want to return list.http.get, and then we'll say list.baseURL plus users. And notice we're getting a red underline here as well. And if we hover over the error, it's telling us that type observable object is not assignable to type observable user. So what we've done here is we've told our method that it's returning an observable of user, but get typically returns an observable of type object. So we need to tell our get method what it's going to be returning. And in this case, and in fact what we're returning is an array of users in this particular method. So we also need to tell our get method what it's going to be returning, and in this case it's going to be returning a user array. Now we'll add another method for getUser, and this is going to return an observable of type user, and we'll say return this.http list.get, and we'll specify the user, and then we'll say list.baseURL plus users plus ID. And I need to pass in the ID into my getUsers method, because when this method is accessed, we're going to be telling it which ID of the user we're looking for, and that needs to go up to our API. And remember how we retrieved an individual user? It was users / and then the ID of that particular user. Now, hopefully you're thinking that we're missing something here, because we are missing something. When we retrieved this list of users from Postman, we also had to send up the authorization bearer token with the request. So we're also going to need to add that onto our request, and the get method can also take some options, and inside the options can be the headers. And remember in Postman that we used an authorization header to send up our bearer token to the server. So what we'll do is we'll create a header to send up to the server in our request headers. So I'll say just above the class, I'll say const HTTP options equals, and we'll specify the headers, and we'll say new HTTP headers, and this will bring in automatically our HTTP headers from Angular Common HTTP. And inside here, we'll specify the same as we did in Postman. So the first part is going to be authorization, and we'll set this to bearer, and we'll add a space. And this space is very important, by the way. If you forget to do this, then you're going to merge your token in with bearer, and it's not going to be a valid token, and you'll just get an unauthorized. So if you do this, it's going to go wrong. If you do this, it's going to go right. And we'll go and get our token from the storage in order to send it up with this request. So we'll add a plus, and then we'll say local storage.getItem, and then we'll go and get the token to pass up with our request. Now this is just temporary. We're going to look at a different way of sending up our tokens automatically to the server. But for now, and to provide some clarity about what's going on and how it matches with what we've done with Postman, we'll just set this up manually for now and just add these headers onto our request. So in my to method, I'll add a comma after the request, and I'll pass in my HTTP options, and I'll do the same for the second one as well. And that's our service complete. So now that we have our service, next we're going to make use of the methods inside this service in one of our components, and we'll take a look at that next.